Welcome to the Pod People cast. In this video we'll be sharing 14 true ET encounters. The Encounter Abroad. This is a family story I've heard only twice. I can't remember how it was brought up the first time, but the explanation was very vague, so I asked again a few months later when the family had come together at our cottage during summer. They seemed kind of iffy talking about it, but provided more details. They live in Ukraine, but took a trip to Turkey sometime in the 90s. They had rented a little cottage there that was far enough into the countryside to be considered fairly remote. Long story short, one evening the dogs outside started going absolutely crazy, barking viciously, and overall behaving erratically. One of them, my grandma's brother, went outside to check what was going on, and saw what they can only describe as a UFO nearing their cottage, pretty high up in the sky, but descending a bit as it came closer. He called for the rest of the family to come and see, and to this day, they can still confirm what they saw. They said it was triangle-shaped and had 3 lights, one in each corner. When it got seriously close to the house, they really began to panic, and ran back inside. The walls were shaking, dishes were breaking from the force of the vibrations going throughout the walls and floor, and the dogs outside were barking louder than ever. It hovered over the cottage for several minutes before ascending back up and disappearing. These are all people who are very conservative and rational, and they hate discussions regarding the supernatural, so I have no doubt in my mind that they were telling the truth. When the aliens crashed the sleepover. When I was about 12, my best friends and I used to sleep out on my friend's trampoline in his yard during the summer. We would gather our bedding and bounce around until we got tired, then eventually lay down and go to sleep. One evening, 4 of us were laying on the trampoline talking, when we noticed that there was something floating over the woods nearby. You couldn't see it directly, just that it blocked the stars out as it slowly moved. It was just a little higher than the treetops, and it was completely silent. We were just some dumb kids, so we just watched it. Slowly it drifted, until it was directly over us. Then suddenly, there was this light that I cannot describe. It was blindingly bright. The next thing I remember, we were all standing inside my friend's house, looking out his sliding glass door at the object, as it was still hovering there, and then it glided away. We were all spooked, but we decided to go back out to go to bed on the trampoline. We were laying there for a while, and the next thing we know, it came back again, and did the exact same thing. Again, we found ourselves inside the house, looking out the back door. Beyond all reason, we went back outside, and the same thing happened again. We finally decided to sleep inside with the lights on. My friends and I lost touch as we grew up, but when I was 18, I heard one of them was in town. I ran into him at a party one night, and pulled him aside to ask him about that night, as it had bothered me for some time. His response has shaken me to this day. I cannot describe his reaction sufficiently. He looked at the ground and said, "I don't want to talk about it." I was kinda shocked by his response, so I didn't know what to say. He got up and walked out, and I sat there thinking about what just happened. I got up after a minute to go see if I could find him, but he left immediately after. That was it. I haven't seen him since, or the others. But his response was enough to let me know something strange had definitely happened that night. I don't know if I want to remember. The low-flying triangle. About 2 years ago, I was in Naples, Florida, with my friend. We were on the porch having a smoke around 11 p.m. I was leaning on the railing when, what I thought was a plane in the distance turned toward us. It was flying so low that the front lights blinded us. My friend scrambled for his phone, which turned out to be dead, and I, fearing I would miss it, didn't want to run inside to grab my phone. Though the craft was steadily gliding, it was all happening so fast. As the object got closer, we noticed it was a huge black triangle, with 3 huge, circular lights on the bottom. It was so close, just above the trees, right in front of the building. It was so silent. The only thing making any sound was the trees rustling below the craft. Then the huge black triangle turned on a dime right in front of us, and disappeared over the tops of the buildings. I wouldn't have believed what I saw if I hadn't seen it with someone else. Don't tell anyone. This is a story of my father's. It happened in 1982 while my father was stationed on a military base in New Brunswick. One night, my father's best friend and his girlfriend left just after dark to go see Tron at a movie theater. About an hour later, the friend and his girlfriend were back on the base. The car pulled in, and my father immediately noticed that it was damaged pretty badly, and covered in several different colors of paint. My father asked them what had happened, why they had not gone to the movie. They brushed him off and went to bed. A few days later, my father got his friend to tell him what had happened. They were driving along a stretch of highway, and they noticed lights coming from over a hill just ahead, where no lights should be, because there was nothing around for miles. At the base of that hill, there was a parking lot for a park. A bunch of cars were pulling into the parking lot to investigate the lights, so my father's friend pulled in too. Everyone got out of their cars and began hiking to the top of the hill, when a large disc with flashing lights rose above the hill's peak, and emitted a loud, strange sound. Several cars got banged up in everyone's panic to get away, thus the transfer of paint. My father's friends drove back to the base as fast as possible. A few days later, men in black suits showed up on the base looking for those people. They talked to my father's friend, and then sent him on his way. My father asked him what the men wanted to see him for. The men told the friend that he had better shut up and say nothing about anything what happened if he wanted to keep his military career. Aliens came to see the comet. Back in the spring of 1997, a group of kids from my neighborhood were looking up at the night sky, observing the Hale-Bopp comet. After a while, we started to notice a red and a white dot circling around each other, making sudden movements in every direction like no aircraft I have ever seen. At one point, they merged into one craft, then shot out 3 smaller crafts, although we couldn't tell whether it was a craft, because they just appeared to be balls of light. This went on for a couple of hours. Right before the lights disappeared, they accelerated at lightning-fast speed into the darkness. We all went home terrified of what we saw. The next day, on the front page of our small hometown paper, it said it received several calls. The explanation they gave was that the local airport was testing aircraft. To this day, whenever I see my friends that were there that night, we'll sometimes talk about it. None of us can be sure what we saw, but to this day, none of us have ever seen anything like it. The Rural Visitor. As a kid back in the 80s, I was spending the night at my aunt and uncle's house, which was out in the sticks in Tennessee. I was sleeping on the couch and woke up due to a bright light coming through the kitchen window, and into the living room. I was looking towards the white flickering light. After about 10 minutes, I turned my head, as it was now keeping me awake. After a few minutes, I was about to go sleep on the love seat. I turned my head back to see a tall dark figure standing between myself and the light. I was frozen, and could not move or scream. It approached me, reached out, and began tapping on my forehead with what felt like a nail, or something pointed. This went on another few minutes until I must have fallen, or was put to sleep. I woke up the next morning to a quiet house. When I went into the bathroom, I noticed a red spot on my forehead, and the skin was slightly broken. The no-fly zone. I haven't had any encounters with aliens, but my mom has. On 9/11, yes, I'm serious. My mom went on a walk on the waterway after watching the news for several hours. This was in the evening, and the no commercial flights sanction was already in place. While on her walk, she looked up after feeling like someone, or something was watching her, and she saw a triangular aircraft floating above her. At first, she thought it might have been a military craft of some sort, but then realized it was making absolutely no noise. She said it was so low to the ground that she probably could have touched it if she wanted to, but before she could reach out and touch it, the craft zipped away quickly with no sound at all. Orbiting near an earthquake. 2010, Los Angeles. I was cleaning up around my apartment when I noticed my kitchen lamp swinging and my building rocking. Obviously, it was an earthquake. It lasted for a bit, and I called my friend to make sure she was okay. As we were chatting, I was standing out on my balcony, which overlooks Runyon Canyon, a popular hiking trail. I suddenly noticed this object hovering high in between the mountains. It was way too high to be a helicopter, and too small and low to be a plane. What made it so strange was its shape and lack of movement. It was orb-like, and stood stagnant for a solid 3 minutes before moving at a snail's pace to the west. I'm talking slower than any aircraft, blimp, kite, whatever, that I've ever seen. It also seemed to reflect off the sun, but only at some angles. After moving towards the left, and then once again staying completely still, it immediately darted, at what seemed like an impossible speed in the opposite direction upwards, and disappeared. Something helped us in the swamp. I was 12 at the time, and my family has a camp on the Tangi-Pahoa River in Louisiana. The only way you can get to it is by boat. So it was just my uncle, my cousin, and myself, and we were heading back to the boat launch on a Sunday night. Now the boat we were in didn't have any working lights, so to see where we were going, my uncle would occasionally shoot a flare. We quickly ran out of the flares you shoot, as it is around a 2-hour boat ride back to the landing. So I ended up on the front of the boat holding a regular flare, as we were now on a much narrower stretch of river. To our left in the swamp, 2 large glowing balls appeared. Then there was another one to the right. I was just trying to keep the flare from burning me, and my little cousin was freaking out. After around 10 minutes of them navigating through the swamp, they formed a triangle above us on the river. It is hard to gauge how far up they were, but it was very visible. They continued to follow us for the rest of the journey back to the landing, and as soon as we arrived, they disappeared. This all happened around 18 years ago, but it is something I will never forget. I don't talk about this stuff really, and usually just keep it to myself. It cast a huge shadow. This was about 40 years ago. We were camping in the summer, in the woods behind a friend's house. At about 11 p.m., we had to walk back to the house for something. It was a full moon, and there was plenty of light, so we didn't take flashlights. We went out of the woods and down a long lane that went along an open pasture between the woods and the house. We got what we needed and started to walk back. The moon was behind us over our right shoulder. We could see our shadows on the ground ahead of us from the moonlight. As we were walking, we saw a black circle with no lights. It just looked like a black hole in the sky. It was above the trees and moving towards us slowly. All 4 of us stopped and watched it. It came over the trees and over the pasture, and then suddenly, you could see a shadow moving on the ground where the moonlight was giving the thing a shadow, just like us. And it went from northwest to southeast and passed over us, and kept going until we couldn't see it anymore. It lasted about 2 minutes. It did not make any noise. It did not look like anything, just a perfectly round black circle. It had no lights, and moonlight did not reflect off it. It made a shadow that was about the size of a house. I don't know how high it was, because it had no detail, but it seemed very low, like a couple of 100 feet. We told our parents the next day, but no one believed us. This was in Ohio in 1982 or 1983. The missing hour. Driving in the UK from a friend's dinner party. We set off at around 10 p.m. for a 15-minute drive home. There was myself, my wife in the front, and my 3 sons in the back of the car. We were driving near a US Air Force base in the southeast of England along a long straight piece of road, when there was an incredible flash that the wife and I noticed, and it seemed to wake up my 12-year-old son in the back. Something, I have no idea what, flew with absolute silence over the car. I saw it, my wife saw it, and the son in the back who was awakened by the flash saw it. Something flew right over us, so close you could touch it, and it was big. We got home, discussed it a bit, and concluded the flash was a flare from the Air Force base, and the large object that flew over us may well have been a Eurasian eagle owl. One had been spotted in this area. It was promptly forgotten. Fast forward just over a decade, and the son who was woken by the flash along with myself are talking about this weird event over dinner, when the youngest son, who didn't wake up during the event, tells us how he remembered it happening. He recalled an event that was vastly different than ours. He had never told this story before. He thought it was a dream until we started talking about it. He described how the car was stopped when we saw the flash. We weren't moving, and the low-flying object sat on top of us for a few seconds, then flew off before the car started again. Apparently, I completely ignored this stop-start, and simply continued driving. Now, here's the really cool bit that we had never realized. My wife had made arrangements to call her sister when we arrived home safely. We left at around 10 p.m. for a 15-minute drive. My wife called her sister around 11:45 p.m. to say we had arrived home. I have no idea what happened that night. I was completely sober. My youngest son insists that something very odd happened. My wife is adamant that we took approximately 90 minutes to do a 15-minute drive. Her sister backs this up. I might not know what happened that night, but I am secure in the thought that something happened. The daytime shooting star. I was driving down a road in the middle of the day. There were fields on both sides, and no other cars on the road. I saw what looked like a falling star. It was a big white ball of light with a tail, and it was hard to look at, even with sunglasses on. I had time to pull over and stop, still watching it fall straight down. This thing was going way faster than it should have, and so I was struggling to get my phone out of my pocket without taking my eyes off of it. Here's where it gets weird. Without warning, when it reached eye level, it leveled off. I watched this thing go from vertical to horizontal in less than a second. It disappeared behind a line of trees, and I got out of there. It rose out of the ocean. I used to live next to the beach in an apartment complex. One night I was with my friend looking at the ocean from the balcony. The light from the moon was enough for us to watch the waves on the shore. We saw a light on the ocean. It slowly came out of the water. What we saw was like an orb-shaped ball of light. It was so bright for a moment that I almost couldn't see the object itself. It kept going up slowly, and it suddenly took off quickly into the dark sky. Everything happened in about 8 seconds. We were both freaked out and went inside the apartment. Years later I saw a report on National Geographic about orb-shaped lights flying around a forest in the United States. I knew it was the same thing I saw. It wasn't a police car. This was 2012 or 2013. My ex and I were driving down a remote highway in rural West Tennessee late one night. I was in the passenger seat. It was a very open area, no trees, and surrounded on both sides by flat fields. I'm looking out the window to my right and see this thing traverse the sky. It was an artificial-looking blue light. Think the color of the lights on a police car, but a little darker. It blinked with an even rhythm 3 or 4 times. The thing that stunned me was how fast it was moving. It was low to the horizon, and it moved from the area of the horizon in front of us to the area of the horizon behind us in about 3 to 5 seconds. I wasn't able to estimate its size or closeness to Earth because of how fast it happened, but it was big. I've seen shooting stars that were close to Earth, and this was definitely not what that was. My ex saw it too, and it freaked us both out. Which of these was your favorite story? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe for more true paranormal stories.